Hello, and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. Tonight, we are joined by Deborah Morris. Welcome to the room, Deborah. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. Thank you for asking. It was a little cooler today, but tomorrow it's supposed to be warmer. So, fall's itching in.
It definitely is. But after a hot summer, I'm ready for it.
Yeah, I can't blame you. I cannot blame you at all. So, Deborah, let's just jump right in because I know we've got a lot of content to get through tonight.
Okay.
So, now, Deborah, your book was called The Girl of Many Crowns. And from what I understand, you let me know if I'm wrong, it's rooted in your own family history?
It is. It is.
Ah,
That's how I found this story.
nice.
My aunt was the family genealogist, and she gave me a family tree and kind of hoping that I would take over that job when she went on because her kids weren't really interested. And I started looking. And I had known that we had ties back to royalty, but, it's way back there. And then I started looking at this one young woman, and I thought, there's something wrong here. I need to fix my genealogy because it showed her as a 12-year-old girl, the first princess of France, and she is married to the 50-year-old widower of Wessex, the King of Wessex. And then it shows her a year and a half or 2 years later married to his son, who was about 24. And then a couple of years after that, 2, 3 years later, it shows her married to the Count of Flanders, who was a knight named Baldwin Ironarm. And I thought, okay, this can't be the same person. Who who gets married 3 times by the time they're 17? That's the and goes from being a queen of Wessex twice to being a countess and to being a princess too. But so I thought there is something wrong here. And the more I delved into the story, the more fascinated I was by it and realized she was a very remarkable person and had a lot of strength and progressed from being a pawn, a political pawn, being married off for political purposes, to standing up to the King of France and risking being imprisoned for the rest of her life. She agreed to that rather than marry again at his request. Eventually, she marries the love of her life, who was not royal, but was a count
Yeah. So,
and
now,
powerful knight.
nice. So, when you were doing this part of the genealogy, what shifted you into a full blown historical novel?
Hmm. Well, as I was reading about her life, I just thought people should know about her story. It's remarkable. And I kept hoping someone would write the story, would find the story, and it would be written. And I did a lot of research. And then I put it on the shelf for 25 years, really. And then I decided during COVID, my husband pulled out all this research that I had done, and he said, basically, if somebody's going to write it, you're going to have to do it.
Yeah. I feel you. My father-in-law, when he was still with us, he did some genealogy, and one of the visits we were there, he told us this miraculous story, And I was like, "Oh, wow, I would really love this information so I could write a book on it and just ad lib." So when you saw this information and your husband, like you said, he pointed out writing the book on it, what did the spark feel like as you started to dive into the writing?
Well, I wasn't sure how to approach it at first. I just wanted to get it right and
Mhm,
not elaborate any more than I had to. And initially, I wrote it more as a history with footnotes, and during COVID, I really delved into more history and more research because I really knew nothing about the ninth century. This was a long time ago.
mhm,
And so I would come to a part where I don't know what their clothes were like. I
mm,
don't know what food was available, how they celebrated holidays, how they traveled, what transportation they had, schools, what did they learn, all of these things. So every time I came to something that I didn't know, I had to stop and do research on it. So, but what I did, I finally settled on using something called the Annals of St. Burton, which were written at the time by the monks in Francia and in the monastery of St. Burton. And they kept kind of a record at the end of each year of all the major events that took place. So I based it off the events that took place for 7 years in um, in their world. And they didn't like to write about women. Monks didn't
mm.
didn't think women were all that important.
Can't imagine why.
Unless, yeah, unless the women did something outrageous. So
Mm,
if you made it into the annals, you were doing something that was shocking to them. So she made it in for those 7 years. Um, and so I just used that as those 7 years as my outline, and I went event by event. When there was a gap between events,
mhm,
then I would say, "Okay, what happened during the year at this time?" "Oh, it's Christmas." Research how they celebrated Christmas in the ninth century in Francia or Wessex, wherever she was, and put her in that setting. Um, so that it would be fleshed out into a no huge gaps
right.
in the
So
story.
So as you discovering, you're doing your research into the ninth century, and from what I understand, the ninth century is described as a bridge, if I'm getting this correct, in European history. So when you were researching this time period, was there anything that just surprised you or made you see that world differently than you had expected?
Oh, so many surprises.
I tipped the well, right?
Yeah, I found it fascinating because I had assumed because it is the early medieval period.
Mhm,
So sometimes it's referred to as the Dark Ages. So I
mhm.
just assumed that nobody could read, nobody could write, nobody had any culture. Um, they were all living in huts. I don't know what I thought, but it there was actually this little period of time that started with Charlemagne, her great grandfather, and ends maybe 2 I guess it's her nephews or her grandnephews were the end of what was called the Carolingian Renaissance. And during that time, Charlemagne had this great desire and this vision of bringing culture and beautiful buildings, architecture. They developed a form of writing, which is the basis of the writing we use today. Our script is based
Mhm.
on the Carolingian script. Um, they also he wanted everybody in his empire to be educated. Now, that never happened. It just wasn't practical. They didn't have the means to do all that. But he opened schools and had palace schools and educated as many as he could and encouraged the monks to take people in and and teach them in all the little monasteries. He felt that was an important part of their mission, and that continued. And even the women were well educated and spoke multiple languages and studied philosophy and logic and mathematics. And, it was surprising to me, all, all those, that part of it,
Mhm.
how cultured they were. And then they kind of devolved. I think war does that to
Mm.
countries.
Yeah.
It really does. And you can see in the book that that's one of the dilemmas that her father, King Charles, has, is he wants to focus. He's named for his grandfather, Charlemagne, and he wants to focus on the same things. He's kind of in love with this vision that his grandfather had and wants to bring that to life, but is frustrated because he's constantly being attacked by Vikings and by rebel lords and by his half brother who's trying to take his part of the kingdom. And so it's very difficult when your country's constantly under attack to focus on the niceties of
Right.
culture.
So, let me ask you this. I wanna narrow this down just a little bit. I wanna talk about Judith and Baldwin,
Okay.
the Iron Arm.
Hmm.
So, really defied an empire. So,
Yeah.
beyond the romance, okay, let's put that aside just for a second. But beyond their romance, what do you think their story says about love, loyalty, and power that still resonates today?
I think, if you're looking for a pure romance, this is not your book. If you
Mhm,
love history and you want to know how Europe was formed, because these are 7 crucial years in the formation of modern Europe, and it
mhm,
follows her family as well as her and as well as Baldwin in his journey. They're faced with challenges that test their belief in God, that tests their faith in each other. They're faced with challenges that ask them to define what is loyalty. Baldwin, for instance, when he takes or comes to service in the king's service, he takes an oath that he will protect the king and he will protect the king's family with his life. And he does that. And he is a faithful servant, knight in his service. But then what happens when you are faced with one choice actually breaking that oath? So he is faced with, do am I loyal to the king? I promise to be faithful to the king and defend him, but he also had me promise to defend his family. Now I've got a family member who needs defending from the king.
mhm.
Either way, in some way, I'm breaking an oath. And what is honor? What is right? Um, there's also, um, and really I guess their romance would be a friendship that blossoms into mutual respect for each other, concern for each other, and then romance. In that day, it would not be right for someone who is not royal to approach a royal and, romantically. There would have to be some indication on the royals' part that they were open to that. You could it could be very dangerous to do otherwise.
Right.
And they decide that they would rather, well, once they do decide they want to be together, they decide that they would rather live even with the Vikings. Baldwin actually had an opportunity to join the Vikings and help them against Francia, which he didn't want to do because he was one of the few knights who had ever had any success in fighting the Vikings. But they had developed a lot of respect for him as a fighter,
Mhm.
and he had made some connections there. And so they said, if you ever want to come, we'll find a place for you. And Judith was willing to give up all the riches and the comforts of being a queen or a princess, the palace, the luxuries,
Yeah,
just to be with him.
so that's true love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so away from the factuality of it, let's speak a little bit more to the fictional side. Um, as a San Diego native, you've lived on 4 continents, correct?
Right.
And you've traveled so many countries. How has
Yeah.
the personal experience shaped you in the way you bring ancient cultures to as far as your characters to life, do you think?
I think living in Europe for many years, um, it just gave me a real sense of being there. That helped a lot, having been to a lot of the places. Now,
Mhm.
of course, they looked a lot different than they do now, but there's still vestiges of the ancient in Europe. And then living in the Middle East and living on the in Egypt,
Mhm.
you step back completely
Oh,
even
wow.
further. You
Yeah.
feel like the modern society in Cairo, and you see people driving um, in their Mercedes Benz right along a little donkey cart with a person in a long robe, and they're just trying to keep up with them. And
Mhm.
it's just a fascinating joining of cultures,
Yeah.
and I just feel like it gave me a perspective that people are the same everywhere in their passions, their need for love, their desire for either goodness or for power to use against people. Um, we're the same, and I believe that people are the same back in time too. They had those same feelings. They had different circumstances, and you have to deal with those circumstances. But I think just being exposed to many different cultures and finding good things to love about every culture
Mhm.
helped. And
Well, and
I
also being
gives
open to do that as well. You have to be open enough to be able to even see the diversity.
Absolutely. And people always say, "What was your favorite?" And I think it's hard to find. It's like, what is your favorite child? It's
Yeah.
hard.
I think the same thing about my dogs. They ask you
Yes.
the favorites. I mean, I might have one, but I can't say it in front of them.
Well, we only have one dog, and he
Right.
knows he's the favorite.
Mine are jealous. So now, with your writing, historical fiction, it requires a balance of fact and imagination.
Right.
So, how do you decide when to stay strictly with the record and when to learn and lean more? I shouldn't say learn, lean more into the storytelling to fill the gaps.
Well, I started out, as I said, the first initial draft was like 30% larger than the book ended up to be because it had
Mhm.
footnotes and it was written more like a history. And then I realized, well, her story, it was almost as if I felt she was on the other side, just pushing me to tell her story. Tell my story, tell my story. So I I realized that if I wanted anyone to read it, it needed to read like a novel.
Mm,
But I wanted to keep as many facts as accurate as possible. I took out all the facts that people did not absolutely need to know to move forward through through her story and understand the circumstances surrounding her and make sure that they understand that's why she did this. That's why she did this because of the circumstances she found herself in. But for me, I kept as many events as real as possible, but the imagination really is comes with trying to put yourself into that character in that situation and say, what would I say? How would I feel if I'm a 12-year-old girl leaving my family, sent to another country, all of a sudden a queen,
right.
and married to someone old? Her
Mm,
father's only in his 30s,
yeah.
and her husband is 50. So I mean, how would you feel? And so I just tried to put myself, in that character's situation and think, how would I feel?
Right. So, as we reach our closing for tonight, if our listeners were to take anything away from tonight, what would be the message you would hope they would take away from the book and what it brings to you? Not just you, but your family, because it's sort of your genealogy right there, right?
Right.
So,
I think I would love for all the listeners who have any desire to write, including you. You said you have this story to
yeah.
to not feel that they have to make something up.
Mm,
There are so many heroes. I feel like our world needs men and women heroes who are real because they're there in our genealogy even.
yeah.
And we can found so many fascinating stories just during the research, and I thought, "Wow, somebody should write this. Somebody should write this." And, look in your own families, you would be able to bring to life real people who could be real inspirations to people who are going through difficult times nowadays.
yeah.
And we don't need a Spider-Man or another Superman who aren't possible for us to be, but we can be inspired by real people who actually lived and did courageous things.
Yeah. I roll in the fiction. I've written 15 books myself, but I roll in the
Wonderful.
fiction. Well, thank you. I roll in the fiction.
Yeah,
So, it would be and I know you had to put, like I said, you dive more into the emotional sake to get the fictional balance of your book.
right.
So for me, that would be a real stretch. I mean, as far as, like, having to do historical and based on, like you said, your genealogy. I don't know. I think that's incredible, and especially since this is your first book, I applaud you to I mean, if I could get on a stack of books myself and applaud you higher and higher than my seated pro right now, I would, because that is astounding, and then it's your first book. I mean, it is a miraculous story, and I would urge many people to reach for your book.
Thank you. I think they'd enjoy it if they like history. They'll find out a lot about Europe and why it's even in the countries that it is, because it was being fought over at the time.
Well, I wanna thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. It's been
My pleasure.
delightful.
My pleasure. My door is always open. If you ever wanna revisit me, hit me up, and we'll make it happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you to our listeners. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye for now.